thing, ladies, tomorrow morning with ladies' Bible study starting. Tomorrow, looks like the work is going to continue on in the parking lot, so they'll be out here with heavy construction, so they may not like you if you park in the parking lot. So if you'd pull in on the north drive, we will have that northeast door, the door by the Wee Walkers. I'm going to have that unlocked for the ladies' Bible study, so you can just park, perpendicular to the driveway in the cemetery there. Just pull in and go straight ahead. If you park parallel along there, you won't have enough space. Park there, and you can park by that northeast door and come in right there. We'll have the back door unlocked too, just in case you want to go out and watch what they're doing. Okay, so, and so you can get back in and not have to walk all the way around the building. Okay, so anyway, so we'll have that, but that's tomorrow morning at 9:30. If you want to join, that'll be a blessing, I know, to all the ladies that have come. All right, Dr. Potter, you come, and I'll help you get this set up real fast. So.
Okay. Thank you. I used to sell parking lots, so I have an idea what's going on. It's fun to watch. Anyway, I asked Yola for a picture of her dad, and she sent it to me. She got it from her mom, and there it is. That's what Yenu looked like, Yenu Shapi. And if Yenu is too hard for you to pronounce, it's Eugene is the equivalent in English. And we were talking last week about Liviola. Okay.
We're waiting to hear about the mass baptism.
All right. Got to get to the right spot here. All right. All right. Now here we are. The secret police wanted to stop the baptism altogether. They decided that it would be at least some kind of a victory for them if they confined the baptism to the church so they'd have a minimum number of people watching. And the secret police used his scare quotes, friends, fellow pastors to put pressure on him. Many of those pastors were cooperating with the secret police. So what happened? And that's where we left the cliffhanger last week. The baptism was held indoors. The members of the church would have backed him if he had chosen to defy the police. The pastor that told me about this situation said he believed that Ola made a mistake in backing down. He said the members of the church would have backed him to the death. So, but he chose not to defy the police. Footnote, the secret police had a man that was to organize a group of ruffians to break up the baptism at the riverside if they had chosen to do that. And then the same man oversaw what happened in the church. And did I say there were more people outside the church than there were in? Twice as many people outside as in. So they did have a big crowd. And that man later made a profession of faith and is now a member of that church. So this discouraged him. He eventually resigned from the church. He took a lower, more humble ministry, and finally in 1978 he was able to emigrate to the United States. But in the United States, the Romanians here were not as receptive to his message as they had been in Romania, and he passed from Los Angeles to heaven after suffering several strokes in 2008. Now, I want to make a comparison here. 2 weeks ago, we talked about Mihai Cornea. Last week, we talked about Liviola. And just a few comparisons. Their ministries were 75, 80 years apart. They both endured state-sanctioned persecution. Ola was a Hungarian who loved and ministered to Romanians. And what did I do? Did I get that backwards? Kornia was a Hungarian who loved and ministered to Romanians. Ola was a Romanian who loved and ministered to Hungarians. And if not for the political realities of the day, he undoubtedly would have had a great impact on the Hungarian side of the border, but he just couldn't freely pass over the border. Kornia had no formal education. Ola was well educated, and God greatly used both men. Now we're getting to Russia. Oh, before we get to Russia, one further note. The spark that touched off the revolution that overthrew Ceausescu, the Romanian dictator, was a Baptist prayer meeting held in a park. The police surrounded the church members and opened fire. And back then, word spread rapidly through the whole country through a new invention. It was called a fax machine. This was just starting to be in use then, and they were able to spread it all over the country, and the country was so revolted by that began the revolution that brought Ceausescu down. Now we go on to Russia, and I think one of the reasons that Russia is so important is it's good for us to look at how the believers there responded to persecution and opposition by the state. And there were different ways in which they did that, and I'm not about to judge them as to what kind of choices that they made, but I think it's good for us to look at the different choices and see what the outcomes were, because we may need to make some of the same kinds of decisions ourselves. One of the sources was German Mennonites who settled in southeastern Russia during the reign of Catherine the Great in the late 18th century. People like Fred Moritz, many of us know him. He's a descendant of some of those Mennonites who became Baptists who were from Russia. So that was one source. Pietists who conducted home Bible studies, which appealed to people disgusted with the spiritual deadness of the Russian Orthodox Church. And then the Mulligan Sect, which separated from the Russian Orthodox Church in the 1860s. And there was official persecution of these people. They'd be called into court, and there was one way that you could defend yourself and you would be sure of getting off without any problem. If you could just demonstrate, if your neighbor said he gets drunk on Friday nights and he beats his wife, then you obviously were not one of those Baptists. So that's the way they defended themselves. And of course, the Baptists didn't have that kind of testimony. The Baptists suffered the persecution. Many of the Mulligans came to Baptist views under the preaching of a British nobleman residing in St. Petersburg, G.A.W. Walgrave, Lord Radstock. Radstock himself was not a Baptist. He was Plymouth Brethren. But nonetheless, many of the people were converted under his preaching, came to Baptist views. That was a time of spiritual awakening in St. Petersburg. Famous Russian writers like Fyodor Dostoevsky and Leo Tolstoy came to some kind of an understanding of Christianity. I think they may well have been genuinely born again, although especially Tolstoy had some weird ideas. But you see this in their writings. Their Christianity comes out in their writings. So that was going on at the same time. The Walgrave was mocked and ridiculed publicly, even in the newspapers. They heaped fun on him, but he found a hearing among some of the Russian elites. I mean, here's a guy who's, for instance, colonel in the Russian army, saved. And you didn't get to that kind of a rank if you weren't from a noble family back then. That was part of the political thing. These elites became natural leaders for the new movement. The All-Russian Baptist Union began in 1881, and it's centered in Kiev, in Ukraine. The All-Russian Baptist Union began in 1881. Next line down. Russian Union of Evangelical Christians, which was less strict, started in 1907 under the leadership of Ivan Stepanovich Prokhanov. And there's a picture of Prokhanov. The All-Russian Baptist Union, the stricter of the two groups, owed its strictness in part to the influence of Johann Anken. So we come back to him again. What a great, good influence for God the man had, not only in evangelism, but also in encouraging people to live a holy life. Baptists suffered varying degrees of restriction and persecution under the czars, and then, wonder of all wonders, ironically, the Baptists gained an unprecedented degree of freedom under the Marxist Revolution of 1917, perhaps because Lenin saw the Baptists as allies in breaking the power of the Russian Orthodox Church. And it's interesting, some of the laws that were set up by Lenin at that time at least gave lip service to religious liberty, and many years later, the Russian Christians would appeal to those things that Lenin had done and say, look, we have a right to do this because Lenin said we could. And this is the law in the books. And the Russian authorities had to overlook that in order to do the persecution that they did. So, by the way, what is it? Ham Sandwich Nation? Someone had said that any good district attorney can indict a ham sandwich, can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. If there are enough laws on the books, you will break a law every day without even knowing it. And the advantage of that kind of thing, and that's the kind of thing they had in those communist countries, is so that if somebody doesn't like you, they can always find something to convict you of. And we have so many laws on our books that it's getting to be that way here too. In any case, Lenin was more concerned about consolidating his power than in quelling religion. So this changed, of course, with Stalin. In 1944, the Soviets forced both major Baptist groups to unite to form the All-Union Council of Evangelical Baptists. And they also coerced Pentecostals and Mennonites to join, although later both of those groups withdrew. The government's purpose was to more easily monitor and control the churches. This is one of the great advantages of Baptist church polity, in that we don't have some central office that we're answerable to. Each church is independent, and so for the government to control a denomination that's hierarchical, all they have to do is capture the top. But in order to control Baptists, you've got to go to every single local church, and that's good. In 1960, the government issued new statutes concerning the operation of churches, and these are interesting. Children under 18 could not attend services and could not receive religious instruction. Children belonged to the state. No one under the age of 30 could be baptized. You know what the basis for that law was? That was health code. Being baptized and put under the water is dangerous. What if you swallow something and there's germs in it? So they were not permitted to baptize anyone under age 30. Churches had to stop evangelizing and just try to maintain their current membership. And back then, there were all kinds of complaints that would appear in newspapers and stuff. You can't get on a train without somebody trying to give you a tract and witness to you. The registered churches were those that cooperated with the government, and the unregistered churches were those who refused to cooperate. So that was the two directions that they went. Some cooperated and said, as Christians, we have to obey the laws, and they cooperated, they obeyed the laws, and others refused to do that and said this is a violation of our convictions. Now, for us to get a feel of this, especially the unregistered churches, I want to focus on one individual, Georgie Petrovich Vins. He was a leader of the unregistered churches, and he's an example of what life was like under Soviet communism. Vins's father, Peter, was a Russian American who returned to his homeland as a missionary. And the Soviets executed him in a labor camp in Siberia in 1943, in the middle of the Second World War. The younger Vins, who pastored an unregistered church in Kiev, suffered in prison for terms of 3 and then 5 years, and the state confiscated his property. He left behind a couple of biographical books about different phases in his life, and I especially enjoyed the book that his daughter Natasha wrote. She tells about how she was saved and the influence of her father on her. She was educated in the Russian public schools, and they persuaded her to atheism. And just the sweet influence of her father drew her back to the Lord. And Vins's ministry, by the way, goes on today. It continues. In exchange for Soviet spies, Vins came to the United States in 1979, along with other dissidents. Don't want to get political here at all. There wasn't much that I really appreciated about one particular president that we had at that time. But of all the things he did, this was the best one. He did manage to get dissidents out of Russia, and I thank God for that. Imprisonment in Siberia had broken Vins's health, yet he continued his preaching ministry in the United States, and then again he went back to Russia after the fall of communism, and they restored his property, which turned out to be a token amount, but the government did recognize, at least admit, that what they had done before was wrong and illegal. So there was that. Our Baptist forefathers dared to practice what the Reformers accepted in theory only: the Bible as the authority for faith and practice. The Reformers said that the Bible was the authority for faith, or the Bible is the, how to phrase it, the supreme authority for practice. It isn't the supreme authority for practice, it's the only authority for practice. And the Baptists were willing to sacrifice their reputations, their property, and even their lives to practice what they believed the Bible taught. They were so committed to the Bible as their infallible guide that they were willing to endure hardships and intense persecution, as we have seen over, by the way, those of you who are new, this is the 9th week of my 6-week series. Hebrews 11:38 contains an apt description of these heroes of the faith, of whom the world was not worthy. And then it adds in chapter 13, verse 7, whose faith follow. So now it's our turn. Questions? Yes?
I assume the fax machine was used to distribute news that was controlled by the government-controlled media.
It was to get around the government-controlled media, yes. That's how they did it. Mhm. And the government hadn't figured out how to stop it. Yes?
Just a question on church autonomy.
Mhm.
Is that the definition of evangelical free? You know,
Other people are more educated about evangelical free than I am. Free church would be more autonomous, I think.
They still enforce, the E-Free currently still has essentially a denominational head. I guess I'll stand up. They still have a denominational head that they really refer back to. So there's a couple different groups in E-Free. Some would be more independent, others listen to one another. So it would be a little different than what we have like in our circle here in the state of the AIBCI. It's a fellowship of churches and pastors with no authority at all. That structure is a little sturdier, if I can put it that way, in the E-Free churches. Though you're right, there is some independence there. So.
yeah, so that's just because I never studied that, just
Right.
wondering what that the
Yeah.
free actually meant you were
Yeah.
Right. So, right, it's like the churches, the E-Free churches here in the area don't necessarily listen to a denominational head.
Right.
But there's fairly strong voices there.
Well, how many churches going to attach itself to a body of
Sure, there's going to be some fellowship going on.
wise counsel of
Yes.
understanding?
Yeah.
With a
Good.
multitude of
Right. But there's no top down.
right.
Any other questions? Yes?
Who was A.W. Tozer?
Was it? I think he was CMA, wasn't he? Christian Missionary Alliance. In a lot of ways, a good man. Put out a lot of good books and sermons. But yeah, he pastored in the Chicago area. Mid-20th century. He was what we would call maybe an evangelical mystic. But not a mystic in a bad sense. Any other questions? Okay.
Good.
Your turn.
Yeah, praise the Lord. Don't forget, the booklets that he wrote a number of years ago, we still have copies here. If you have not picked one of those up, feel free to grab one of those, or feel free to see me, and I'll be happy to give you one. And I have some extra copies. If you feel like it would be valuable to somebody in your family or something, they're here for our use, so let's use them. Feel free to ask them for that. Good. Well, we appreciate our heritage, don't we? Our brothers and sisters in Christ have shown us the way. One of the things that, as I've been digging in for these last couple of years in the book of Acts, that we don't, as Americans, in my opinion, don't grasp is the number of times that the New Testament scriptures prepare us to face persecution. There is so much scripture that even communism used health laws to persecute Christians. That should not be outside of the realm of reality for us today. Okay. And here's the point. Here's the point for us as a church family. We need to be wise. We need to ask the Lord for wisdom. In Russia, there were good men both in the registered and unregistered churches. That's why he said, we're not going to necessarily argue. There are even probably to this day some. It's not as strong because Russia is open again to a degree. But among Baptists in that historical period, there was a strong argument: who do you support? Who do you help? You can help this guy that's connected with the registered church, that's bowing to all that the government says, turning in their names, or are you going to
You know, I must be able to